Hi there, I'm Jock Serong, and this is a little late night reading from my debut novel, Quota. I think most writers will tell you that they have a funny relationship with their first novels. In my case, there were things I wish I'd done differently about this book, and there are things about it that I'm intensely proud of. One of the interesting things about it is that this was my first fictional foray into writing about boats, and I seem to have kept writing about boats ever since. Alright, so I'm going to read to you from the first chapter of Quota and introduce you to one of my favourite characters, who's a guy called Barry Egan. Here we go. Barry Egan knew his way around a steamed dim sim. Warm white paper bag heavy between his thighs. Cold can of Pasito wedged by the handbrake. The dusk had been still on the drive out to Antonia's beach. The ocean lying exhausted after days of southerly gales. The night falling wide around him on the way up the gravel track to the cliff top. He knew from long experience he would feel the view from the cliffs more than see it. He pulled the ute to a halt in the car park, the bull bar nudging it on the pine railing. Rolled the radio dial between heavy fingers around to 3 PF, hits on the west coast, and killed the motor. Tuesday nights at Antonia's, the quiz at 8, and before that, the secret sound. Tonight's sound was an odd, hollow thump that had him perplexed, until some old codger rang from down the coast to pick it correctly as someone banging out a cappuccino handle on a bin. Not being a drinker of fancy coffee, Barry took this as one for the wankers. No reflection on him. He was a simple man, and he liked very much to tell people he was a simple man. But there were things he knew well, things that snapped taut in his head like a reflex. Cars and trivia. Trivia and cars. Trivia about cars. For most of his 56 years, Barry had traded auto parts and hoarded information. The factual rubbish others would discard to keep their house-proud minds prim like a brick veneer. His was more of a 2-bedroom hardy plank surrounded by rusty wreckage. And Lou Mantello's quiz on PF was pitched right where he liked it. Natural disasters, goal-kicking records, dodgy politicians, Bee Gees lyrics. He had no interest in ringing in, God no. He tried that once the first night he'd listened, had a rush of blood about a footy question and called in as Keith from Newport. Wayne Carey, Lou. Everyone on the coast knew that Barry Egan stammered under pressure. The sniggering followed him around town for days afterwards. He slotted home a dimmy and sucked the soy from his fingertips while Lou asked for the capital of Peru. Lima! Flecks of cabbage and pork landed on the dash. Barry's eyes roved the void beyond the cliff railing as some idiot came on air, fumbled around and finally had a swing. San Pedro? Lima, dickhead! Enjoying the little rush of authority that accompanied his annoyance. Sorry, mate, nice try. I can see where you're going with San Pedro. Lou cut the hapless caller and lined up a very precise-sounding woman from Geelong, who nailed it. In what sort of craft, pressed Lou, did the Japanese invade Sydney Harbour? Anne of Belmont hesitated. Barry didn't. Mini-sub, mini-sub, mini-sub! He could make out the lights of the saltworks now, and the faint white pulse of the lighthouse across the bay. Anne had it. It was some sort of submarine, wasn't it, Lou? And Lou, whose abiding flaw in Barry's opinion was his laxity, gave her the nod. Christ. Barry took a swig of Pasito as the last dimmy performed a brief encore in the back of his throat. Anne was perking up. Love your show, Lou, she said. I listen every week. Barry knew from long memory the low headland invisible on his right, capped with straggly tea tree, a nav marker and a couple of Norfolk pines. Straight off the point was a channel where the boats came and went, rocking on the swell, their booms swinging through a giddy arc. As they took the corner at the point, they'd settle in the water, the bow wave fading. In daylight, you could see the deckies hosing off the work area from where Barry was, sluicing scraps of the kill through the vents in the sides of the vessel. In a straight line in front of him, and maybe a K out to sea, there were reefs, low tracts of boulders arranged in a devilish maze. They were invisible at high tide, sometimes even low tide, seen from the shore only when the tide pulled right away from the town. Then they would lie there, sullen and treacherous, the dark clusters threaded by winding passages of deeper water. The sea pulled endlessly from right to left across the reef, west to east. It had something to do with the longshore drift, as Barry understood it. "How many Kardashian sisters are there?" Lou's voice was all sniggering guile. "3 and a brother," yawned Barry as he knocked off the last of the pasito. The reefs were called Gawley's Kitchen, though Barry had never met anyone who could tell him why. When the swell rolled silently up from the southwest, the surfers would head out there. Some of them paddled the whole stretch from the foot of Antonia's cliffs. Mostly they used tinnies or jet skis. On flat days, the reef and its creatures belonged to the divers. Hefty crays and glassy-eyed trumpeters shot through the gill rakers. To the north and east of Gawley's, to Barry's left, the bay opened up again. A wide, docile bowl stretched out towards the cape 30 or more k's away. As it curved away from town, the land came round parallel to the prevailing swell, and the waves turned to long, straight lines sweeping right to left below Barry's clifftop perch. They ended their run at the eastern end of the bay, finally unburdening the last of the Southern Ocean's mythic fury on the sand. No one went there. Hardly anyone would walk a dog that far. The trail riders wouldn't take their horses down there. The swell dumped deep piles of kelp that clogged the beach. Dirt bikers and the odd fox shooter, that was about it. Barry had been there, but then he had a natural curiosity about things. "Okay then, Darlene." Lou had someone new on the line. "Which poison is said to have killed Socrates?" "Bugger. Hemlock or nightshade?" The callers were going down like they'd been strafed. Arsenic, strychnine, cyanide. Some stoner reckoned iocane powder. Something about Gawley's. Something out there in the dark wasn't quite dark. Barry made the mistake of looking at the lighthouse again and then had to blink away the purple spot in his vision. Violet, violet, pink, white, gone. The water surface had the look of a grubby mirror, streaked with a blacker grey where the reef peered through. Hemlock. It just sounded ancient. Laurel wreaths and hemlock. Togas. He glanced down, soy on his shirt. The sort of thing Deb used to tease him about. "Did you get any of it in your mouth, dear?" Lovely Deb, tired and warm. Gone last spring, and with her all of the order and domesticity in Barry's life. The alcohol interlock device, now clipped to the dashboard, represented the loss and the pain that still echoed. He'd taken very hard to the stout in the weeks after the funeral. One schooner chasing another as he reassured the sympathetic. "Yeah, doing very well, thank you for asking." Eyes creasing close enough to a smile. He'd been warned about driving home from the pub. Taken aside, told it had to stop. He'd just accepted the warning like he accepted the condolences and concern. In the end, he'd left the local cop no choice but to book him. The great irony being that once he'd lost his licence, he completely lost interest in the grog. Like it had served its purpose, putting him off the road, then gone on to tap some other poor bugger on the shoulder. The time without his licence didn't worry him all that much, aside from missing his drives out to Antonia's. The interlock, though, that was an assault on his way of life. It seemed to choose exactly those times when he was most comfortable to start up its furious screeching for a sample of his breath. Horn blaring, lights flashing, until he pulled over to satisfy it, feed it like some mewling infant. Minutes would pass before he could gather his frightened thoughts and restart the car. He fumbled around under the driver's seat for the binoculars, took a moment to focus and find his target in the blackness. He could just make out the low lines of whitewater on the outer edge of Gawley's, when he found the thing that had caught his attention. Orange. There was no fixed light on the reefs. Couldn't be, they were too exposed. The fishing boats had a red port light, green starboard and white all round. But this was orange, and it was moving. Larger, smaller, moving or flickering. It was irregular somehow, getting bigger, then fading again, then pulsing brightly. It was still a long way off, well over the back edge of Gawley's. The beam of the lighthouse, a cold white shaft through the air, caught it once, then again. Barry knew he was looking at the gunwale of a boat, the side of the cabin, and the idea came to him quietly like another answer. The boat was not where it was supposed to be. He snapped the radio off, tried the high beams, but they bleached out somewhere in the middle distance. A sheet of newspaper whipped past the front of the ute as though it had taken fright. Barry noted its path. The wind had arrived from the southwest again, punching a violent gust into the stillness, followed by a long stream of colder air. The heavy calm of the evening was done, and a change would reassert the order of things. He turned the lights off and waited patiently for his eyes to figure it all out. Leaning forward now, squinting, until he felt a little ache under his eyebrows where the binoculars were pressing. He scrunched the greasy paper bag into a ball and fired it backhand at the dark space where the dog lay curled. A moment or two later, light and dark resolved themselves into shapes, and the shapes made sense. He picked up the phone from the passenger seat and started dialing. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed that little reading, and I'll get another one ready for next time. Thanks.